Hey, welcome to Movie Friends. My name is Seth. Today we're talking about Horizon, an American Saga Chapter One, directed by Kevin Costner from 2024. We will be discussing spoilers throughout this entire episode, so if you haven't seen the film, which at this point, there's a good chance that you haven't, you need to turn this off and go watch this 3-hour movie and then come back and listen to this discussion. My guest for today is Paul Trigstad, and apparently he and I only do films about big deserts together. Paul, what's going on?
Hey, Seth, how's it going? I think it's also a requisite that we need to have part 1 or part 2 in the title.
Right. That's true. I didn't think about that. That is another connection. Of course, we were referring to our episode that we did together on Dune 2, and I was thinking about you today because they maybe announced Dune 3 for 2026.
Maybe. Yeah, very exciting. It kind of took the wind out of my Kevin Costner sails a little bit to get that news.
Got it. You were in a Horizon mindset. And
I was.
Yeah. And then Dune 3 potential news dropped and it all went out the window.
It's a hard balance between Horizon Part 2 in 2 months and Dune Part 3 maybe in 2 years.
I mean, I go to the movies a lot. The last time I remember something like this happening was when they did The Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions only a few months apart.
I want to say Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3 released.
They were real close too?
Yeah, shorter than a 12-month interval, but this is something else.
Yeah, so this is June 28th on the date that we're recording. In a few days, it will be July. And then next month, the movie comes out. So it feels like, it's like slippery math, but it feels like they're almost like a month and a half apart.
I want to ask a question about that really quick, if I can. Have you seen the posters at the movie theaters? They say Horizon Part 1 and they have the date, and Part 2 they have the date. Are they going to change them out for the next one, or is that just the Horizon Part 1, Part 2 slate?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Maybe it was an economical decision. They thought.
Will Horizon Part 1 still be playing when Part 2 comes out?
The Horizon double feature is
the
first million to make movie to make $1 gazillion.
Well, I'll tell you this much. In my theater, there were just as many people there tonight as there are for any superhero movie premiering.
Oh,
so
very cool.
On my way into the theater, I was like, I bet you there's going to be a lot of dads going to see Horizon on Friday night by themselves. And then I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm a dad going to see Horizon by myself on Friday night. Yeah. But yeah, there was a lot of dads, I think I was the youngest person there. But that's okay. Still people in the seats.
Yeah, it was a moderately full screening that I attended this morning at the 9:20 matinee.
Wow.
So it was mostly me and the retirees, yeah.
Wow. The earliest I've ever seen a film for is 10. I didn't know theaters opened that early. Gee whiz.
Yeah, for the real early crowd.
Wow.
Yeah, special experience.
So this is a 3-hour movie, and I'm going to just throw this out there now if you're listening. I am terrible with names. I am not going to remember. I don't know that I could even tell you Kevin Costner's character's name.
I remember he had the word Haynes
in
his name.
Yep.
But that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm exactly in the same boat. I guess I'm going to pull this movie up on Letterboxd and try and scramble our way through this a little bit, but absolutely same boat. I don't even know where to start with this movie, to be honest. This is a difficult one.
I didn't recognize Sienna Miller was Frances Kittredge, the mom with the rifle through the dirt lady.
Yeah.
And she was great. And I hope, if you start now listening to this, I'm not like here to like make fun of this movie or anything. There are some humorous things surrounding Horizon. I keep wanting to call it Horizon Zero Dawn, which I think is a video game that I've never played, but that just keeps rattling around in my brain.
Exactly the same.
Yeah. But for the most part, I thought everyone did pretty good. I'm not an Avatar guy, and Sam Worthington, I was like, is this the best I've ever seen Sam Worthington in a movie?
You think it's better than Clash of the Titans?
I haven't I haven't seen that Clash of the Titans. Or if I had, well, I remember Liam Neeson.
Oh yeah, maybe he wasn't that. He was. He was Zeus.
He's the one who releases the Kraken. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this is a really large film with both long scenes and a bunch of really short scenes. And I thought we could kind of start from the beginning and then maybe just go through the 3 separate stories. If you're listening to this, by the way, Paul showed up in character. He's got a great looking hat. He's got his Wyatt Earp and Waterworld. Are those Blu-rays, DVDs, 4Ks?
Yeah, this is the Wyatt Earp Blu-ray and the Waterworld 4K because we got to go big for the classics, but for the essentials.
Yeah, and I know that you're a big fan of Waterworld, which is why I had asked you if you were planning on seeing this, because I knew that I wanted to do this one, and I was like, I don't know of anyone who is like committed to seeing Horizon, and then I thought maybe Paul would. I don't know.
Absolutely, and it fits well into my oeuvre too because I like westerns a lot. I feel like I grew up watching a lot of westerns, so and especially Kevin Costner westerns. Like Wyatt Earp or Open Range, another classic. I haven't watched Yellowstone myself. I don't know if you. I know that you're not as big into TV either. So do you have any experience with that? Yeah.
No. That's my parents love Yellowstone, and then there's like another one like 1895 or
and I think there's like a 1921 or something.
Yeah, I think there's like 3 Yellowstone shows, which I'm sure are great. And what got me really excited, Kevin Costner put out a little video prior to this movie coming out, where he was like, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it basically boiled down to like, hey, Yellowstone fans, you know how you've liked watching me on TV? Well, I'm done with that. I'm only making movies from now on, so you better come see this movie. See ya at the movies. And I was like, that's the best marketing for a movie I've ever seen. Just like threatening in a very non-threatening way, like, you better come see this because I'm done.
So a little curtain back on my life, but I try and go to the gym like every morning, and that's pretty much my only exposure to news, like network news.
Sure.
And one of the segments they keep running, it's been like every week, Kevin Costner's out there with some ridiculous story or ridiculous claim that's making the news. I feel like he's really been going for it for Horizon. It's been talking about Princess Diana. It's been nuts.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
I guess
wow.
He's claiming she was signed on to do The Bodyguard 2, which never happened. But
wow. Yeah. All right, sure. Why not?
It's been impressive.
Kevin Costner says Michael Jackson was supposed to be in the original Yellowstone TV show.
And, Kevin Costner, he's such an American icon. He's a classic leading man, one of my favorite leading men. I'm not sure he's actually the best, like, thespian in the world, but he brings, like, a really comfortable presence that just feels good. It's like mega dad energy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's kind of egotistical, but enough of a dork that it feels kind of endearing rather than antagonistic.
Yeah, I was I just felt like I was like, oh man, this is a movie made by someone who was making movies in the 90s, especially when we get to the very brief sex scene between him and Marigold. I was like, Kevin Costner would totally be like, yeah, we need a sex scene. And we like are like fading in and out, and it continues on. And honestly, when it faded to black the last time, I fully expected the words directed by Kevin Costner to come up on screen, because Marigold says to him, she's like, oh, I'm going to put you to sleep. And I was just like, oh, that's how the movie ends? Wow. And then obviously it didn't. But yeah, it felt like, I don't know, like on my way home, I was questioning why you're filming out in Wyoming and all these amazing places. And it just felt like there were so many of the shots were just like close-ups of people, where I feel like if this movie were made by someone who is making stuff today, or like a younger person, there would be more like, the assassination of Jesse James or Chloe Zhao type stuff, like using the environment more long shots and longer monologues. Like he's shooting this as if these characters are in like a coffee shop or something like that.
I've heard quite a few reviews. Excuse me, I'm going to start over. I've heard quite a few reviews compare this to television and speculate that maybe this would have been better off as a television show, or maybe a miniseries, something to that effect. And I think what you're describing is kind of a staple of TV versus movies, which I think of like a lot of mid to close-up shots of characters, a lot of dialogue. And so I agree with that sentiment that a lot of reviews have been saying, that it does feel very TV format. And I did want to ask how you felt about that. Do you think this would have been better suited to a streaming release, or are you happy that this got a theatrical release?
I'm happy. I think, I don't know. Like we're recording this. I literally like walked in my front door, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and like walked upstairs. So I'm still kind of processing.
Yeah. I've had all day to sit with this movie, but I am really happy you want to talk about it tonight, because I feel like this movie is such a bowl of spaghetti, and I don't mean like a spaghetti Western, but there's so many strands that it's just, it's going to be really hard to remember like exactly how things fit together. Even like every hour that passes, I feel like I'm losing Horizon Part 1 a little bit more.
Yes. So we start out with some land surveyors, and I was actually genuinely excited. Like, I was like, oh wait, are we gonna like see how this works? Because I'll see land surveyors around town, and I'm always like, how do they do what they do? What is that little machine tripod thing doing? And I was like, maybe we're gonna spend some time with them and see how this all works. And then they're killed, and this dude is riding to this fake town that I suppose he has bought land from Giovanni Ribisi, I guess. And he encounters a person at this old worn down church. And I have to ask you, was that Kevin Costner in like old makeup special effects? Because I looked at the cast list, and on the cast list there is a person called Raynor Shine, and they are credited as Hermit. And looking at Raynor Shine's picture, it kind of looks like the person who was there. But I genuinely was like, whoa, over these 4 chapters, are we going to get like a time machine story where like Kevin Costner ends up back at the beginning of the movie? I don't know. Did you feel that at all? Not the time travel, but
So in the spirit of Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter One, let me answer in a way that only is loosely related. First of all, I actually have done some land surveying, so I was really excited to see that too.
Very
But
cool.
also, that was the first sign that we may be in trouble to me, because with a big heroic swell, it says Horizon, and I'm like, we have not seen anything but a dude taking measurements on a surveying stick. Like, this is not the title drop moment.
Right.
Like, what are we doing here? So that scared me just a little bit. But secondly. Yeah, I thought that guy was Kevin Costner. I was like, oh, and I felt like the camera was even holding back, like he was always out of focus in the foreground. We're seeing the other guy, and then he comes into focus, and it's just like some guy, but maybe Kevin Costner in a lot of makeup.
It reminded me a lot of the opening to Kurosawa's Rashomon, which is like these dudes hanging out in this big stone gate, and it's pouring rain, and they're talking about, oh, we heard this story, because the way that the character like rips the advertisement from the guy's hand, and the guy doesn't respond at all. Like, you're alone out in the wilderness, and someone just comes up from behind you and grabs a paper from your hand, and you don't even like go or excuse me, sir. And so like it also has a thing of like what's the one with the heffalump trees? Something
the
that
Lorax?
I speak. The Lorax, yes, the Lorax.
Yeah.
It had an air of like the Lorax, where the one slur is like, "I'll tell you a story if you drop a coin in the cup," or whatever. And I was like, "Yo, is that like old man Kevin Costner? And now he's going to tell us the story of Horizon and the story of what happened to the town?" No, I don't think so.
Like, he's sitting in the ruins of an old church. You're like, oh, like something went down here. And he's just like, no, you missed the town. It was by the river.
Right. Right. And also, it was 2 men and 1 boy. Like,
let me ask a question here, just in broad picture. Did you feel like you had a little bit of trouble following the movie basically at any given point in time?
There one moment where I just felt like I was like, did I fall asleep? Is towards the end, when Marigold and Hayes Ellison, Kevin Costner, they're staying at that camp, and they're working with like the Chinese people. Yeah, we come into the tent, and Marigold is with this guy, and it's kind of like mid conversation where she's like, "Oh, I have to leave," or he's like, "I'm going to leave, and I'm going to leave you." And he's talking about Hayes like he knows him, but I was like, have we seen this guy before? Has Marigold been lying this whole time? Has he been tracking? Like, I just felt like it just dropped in on them, and I was totally lost. And then, eventually I figured it out. But for the most part, we see Jenna Maloney's character with a baby, and then later it's like a toddler. So I was like, okay, some time has passed. Yeah, when we cut to the wagons, I was like, oh, this is a whole other... number one, it's a whole other camera filter, and number two, it's a whole new cast of characters. Like, wow. And I wasn't sure if we were going to keep going and there'd be a 4th or 5th story, but I think I did okay. Did you find it difficult?
This was the kind of movie that started making me question my own media literacy, because I felt like we kept just being shown characters and doing nothing with them or moving on from them, to the point where I was confused if I was seeing the same character twice or not. For instance, when we see the surveyors, we see 2 native boys watching them from a cliff. And I don't know if those are supposed to be some of the same characters who come back later, aged up. Maybe a rewatch would clear that up, but it wasn't clear to me on first watch. And the same thing with the guy who rides into town at the big bearded fellow who offers bread to the guy at the chapel. I think that guy's Mr. Pickerington. I'm
you
really
think
not
so?
sure. That's what I thought. That was my theory going through it. So I'm just gonna call him that. I don't know if it's right, but we see him like fly fishing, I think, and then we cut to Jenna Malone just bursting in and shooting some guy who has a big beard, whose face we're not really shown. And I thought that was Mr. Pickerington. I was like, oh, did we?
Oh no, that's Mr. Sykes. That's Daddy Sykes.
Yeah, and that made sense later, but moment to moment, I was kind of having difficulty tracking who was who and just how all these different people fit together, if at all.
Yeah, so like as far as I gathered with her story, which I think is like the first point in the timeline probably, is that Jenna Maloney and Marigold were sex workers, and Mr. Sykes was particularly cruel and had a baby with Jenna Maloney. And so it seems like maybe the first chance she gets, she kills him, gets revenge on him, takes the baby, and then disappears. So now the Sykes want to find her, but not just to kill her, but to get the kid back.
Yeah, that, and it all made sense to me as the movie unfolded. It was just, again, just moment to moment, having difficulty understanding how the pieces fit together, and still coming out mystified by some of the choices the movie made on what to show and what not to show. For instance, in those opening moments, we show the history of this town. We see those 3 people who were killed. We don't know exactly how they were killed, but we know why those graves were there. We see that bearded fellow, Mr. Pickerington, ? Come through. So we have an idea of how Horizon maybe starts and some of the lineage of that town, but we just drop into Jenna Malone's storyline. Like, she's just like, screw you, Mr. Sykes, and just like shooting him. and I was very mystified by what we're shown. Like, we weren't shown more of her background, but we were shown the crosses. Yeah, it was very curious.
I mean, clearly, 3-hour film, it can be daunting, large, huge commitment of time. And I, for the most part, didn't feel like, oh, okay, this is really, really long. There were a few moments when Michael Rooker is like spying on his own wife, ? With the 2 other soldiers. That whole thing, I was like, Costner, cut this out. Like, what is, like, oh man, yeah, that part.
So, yeah, I'm not a guy who minds long run times. Honestly, like, I see a movie has a 3-hour runtime, I get excited. I'm like, oh wow, this is going to be a huge journey. But I very much agree, because there was these big drawn out segments that were oftentimes like clumsily constructed and didn't really add a whole lot. And probably the movie would have been benefiting to having them cut it. And and a lot of them just felt like very TV to me as well. That scene in particular felt far more like a TV scenario. It had that like smacks of, oh, we need humor and drama and blocking and something to fill this 5 minutes because we have 15 episodes in this season.
Right. But we don't, because it's a movie.
Which begs the question, what's happening? Why are we doing this?
Right. So, apart from the Michael Rooker slapstick scene and maybe a few other things here and there, I didn't mind the runtime. I thought it was fine. I enjoyed it. And honestly, by the time it ended, I thought, okay, I would like to see a second one of this. I don't know that I want to see a third and a fourth one, because I feel like all of the storylines that were started could be wrapped up in another 3 hours, So I'm curious as to what else will be introduced to prolong all of these stories. But I didn't hate it, I guess I should say. I enjoyed parts of it, more so like plot points than necessarily like dialogue or acting, even though I think the acting is totally fine. Like I said, I don't think anyone is really like doing a bad job. Some parts, when we get to the little boy who has taken up with the people who are selling scalps, and he signs up because he wants revenge, and then it comes around to like, actually this isn't about revenge, it's just about money, and it's about killing women and kids, and he's like standing up on top of the hill looking down. And it was good of Costner to not do actual flashbacks to the night that Horizon gets burnt down, because that would, that's super, super obvious, right? But you can see that's what's happening with the kid. Like, he's like, oh my God, like, I set out on this journey because of what happened to me, and now we're doing this to other people. And so, like, more so things like that I really enjoyed. But
one of my big issues with the film, where I feel like it doesn't earn its runtime, is we're 29 minutes in, we're going back to Dune. Everything, all roads lead to Arrakis. Of course. Dune Part 1, I've been a defender of Dune Part 1. People call it an incomplete movie, but I feel like there is at least complete chapter told there, an arc of Paul Atreides we get from point A to point B. Maybe a more robust example of that is Fellowship of the Ring, right? It's the beginning chapter of a big story, but it has a very conclusive ending. It feels very satisfying. And Horizon is pretty much devoid of that, at least in my mind, for most of the stories, except for, I think that kid is Russell. He has an arc, and I agree. I think his is the strongest, where he realizes what revenge looks like, and they're just, wreaking the same sort of ill that they were dealt. But in that too, this brings up another point, and I'm sure you were going to get around to this at some point, but this is not my lane. But indigenous representation in Horizon is a little questionable, and the raid scene, especially when you juxtaposed Horizon getting raided in that very brutal, very long sequence towards the beginning, and then the Native American village getting raided by the white guys at the end. And the way it's framed is just so much colder and more clinical. The whole movie just feels so much more situated in the settler, the European, white American perspective. And I found that a little bit disappointed, because we had, some really great indigenous characters who, to me, were more interesting. And I thought that actually kind of dovetailed nicely with something you guys talked about on the show a couple months ago. Last of the Mohicans, I think, had a similar critique, where like the antagonist character is kind of more interesting than the hero.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I felt similarly here. We're showing two sides to the initial raid. We don't just see Apache come in and kill everyone and then go away, and then the only other time we see them is when we're tracking them down. You know what I mean? Like we see their reasoning behind doing it. We see the consequences of it. We see little conversations about like, okay, are we going to go with this guy? Are we going to stay with this guy? So they're given like time. Those characters are able to express themselves beyond just like the violence. But I was also like, wow, this is a movie made by someone who was making movies in the 90s. And I don't think that this veers into the area of being like offensive, but I was like, yeah, we're sticking to an American Western, like this is a traditional American Western in how it's framing this story, and including the gang who are hunting down the indigenous people and selling their scalps. I thought that was interesting. And like, there is a moment where I'm going to look up his name because I'm not going to remember him. Jeff Fahey is the actor. People would probably recognize him from like Machete or Lawnmower Man. If you've seen Lawnmower Man, Planet Terror, he plays kind of like the the really, really bad guy out of that gang. And there was a moment where I was like, oh, this is the bad guy of the whole movie, because I've been waiting to see, like, obviously there's like the Psych family, who they just reminded me of like wrestlers in a way. Because you have like the dad who's like the big one, and then there's the older brother who's like the other big one, and then there's a smaller one, but he's still scary and he does a lot of talking on the mic. But I was like, oh, I think that this guy is like the actual bad guy. And I'm curious to see how that develops over the next few movies, because in this one, it's like, oh, the most that we get really is through the Russell character, just recognizing the cycle of violence. And that's what, the dude warns about. He's like, this is my dream. Like, like, you're going to chase them until you can't anymore. And, this will kind of be the end of you. But yeah, I'm curious to see what people will think about that.
Yeah. And to me, it wasn't as much, like you said, it wasn't as much as like offensive representation, because some of what they showed, I was like, oh, this is very cool. Like, please show me more of the indigenous people and their culture and their ways and their internal politics. But even down to just, it was just like an imbalance of how much they were showing us of everyone. I kept thinking about Horizon, or the other town where we meet Costner's character, how you really get a sense of geography for these locations, and you really can put yourself in them and see yourself around them mentally. Whereas when we're in the camp, the indigenous camp up in the mountains with the war chief, it's not really shown in a way that conveys any sense of geography, because they're over by a river in another scene, and it's like, well,
right.
the rocks look similar, but I don't know where this is in relation to where they were. Just little things like that. And then the fact that like, I feel like most of the characters they had just completely disappeared. Like Pionsene, I think, was the name of the like the very warrior like warmongering guy. But I don't know what happened to him. And then the woman, I don't know what her name was, but we focus on her for a while. Then she, I think, runs away in the raid, but I don't know her fate. I don't think we see what actually happens to her. I should say, though, that the raid in the beginning on Horizon is very awesome. It's extremely brutal, but that was like a highlight in the movie for sure.
It's very intense. It goes on for a long time, and
too long. Yeah.
The rest of the movie is so much more like slow burny type action stuff. It really is just that opening raid that kind of propels the story obviously forward, and then maintains like all of the propulsion in the whole movie. Like, it's all just like recovering from that opening scene and how intense it is. Yeah, there's so much to bite off here, for Costner in this movie, where we also have the fort where Danny Houston is hanging out, and hey, there's also little characters there. There's a doctor that drinks and you have to throw water on him. And like I said, like, I'd be curious to see how the next few chapters pull it all together, because I'm not fully willing to pass judgment on this chapter until I see the next one, because it's pretty clear, like you said, and like you were mentioning, other people have said, this feels like a TV show. And so it's not like, oh, they made this one and then the next one will come out in a few years and they're going to go write it. Like, the next one's coming out in a month and a half. It's written. It's part of this story. So much so. And I think that earlier you mentioned something about, Russell feels like he has an arc that we can like clearly see. And then everything else kind of gets lost in the shuffle, because when we're doing our ending montage, which, at this point I'm like, okay, all right, I can start to relax now. We're cutting to all the different characters with just a score. Everyone's got their bit of the flyer. Oh, we're going to the printing house where they're printing these flyers. Okay. Like I'm here, I'm with it. But the closing montage goes right into rapid fire commercial for next movie. And I didn't know where one stopped and one started.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I think it's when Kevin
I don't know.
Costner starts shooting behind him, because I'm like, what is he shooting at? But
Yes.
But the movie's dropped us in a few places, a few cuts
Right.
that are just like, hey, we're doing this now. We're here now.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of like, well, maybe this is just part of the story.
He's riding away and then he turns around and shoots. And so I think, okay, we're going to cut to black here. Oh, no. Wait.
Like,
and then we're getting all this more like romance stuff with Sienna Miller and Sam Worthington. And then I was like, wait, they're showing us the other movie. That's why this movie's 3 hours long, because we're watching 15 minutes of the next one.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe the next one will pick up like directly after that montage ends. I can't tell you.
Maybe this was originally 24 hours and they were like, all right, you need to cut an hour here. And so he was like, all right, I'll take an hour of the first movie and turn it into like 7 minutes of rapid fire stuff. Because genuinely, like, I started laughing, and I like I said, I enjoyed this film. I think that there's a lot of talent behind everything, but truly in the theater, I started laughing once I realized that we were going into the next movie, and not just like, oh, like a quick little preview. Normally what you would do is you would end the first movie. The first movie would cut to black, and then the score will change. The screen will warm under the light of a rising sun, and then we'll get scenes for the next movie. No, this just goes straight into it. It was so confusing.
I'm so glad you were confused by that too, because I was very taken aback and couldn't figure it out. But here's the thing. I think this movie, and I don't know, but to me, this movie needs to be compared not to other Westerns or even other movies, but is best seen as a Western miniseries. And there's a lot of Western miniseries, right? I think Lonesome Dove was a miniseries. Broken Trail is one of my favorite Western miniseries. Steven Spielberg produced Into the West. So I think when you compare it to those, the issue is still that, well, one, it's just that there's not really like a complete story in this first part. And to me, I just don't understand that. Like, this is an original story that Kevin Costner and the other writer came up with, or writers. I don't know how many people are involved with this, but they've crafted this story, and we have all these different storylines. And I think that's great. I enjoyed this movie. I thought it was very immersive to hang out there, but the storylines don't all even connect by the end of part one. Luke Wilson's character is so separated from everyone. It seemed like they had 3 movies that they like could have made, and they decided to just make them all into like this big saga. And I don't know if they did the legwork to make each individual piece stand on its own. Because like you said, I'm excited to see part 2 as well, but I was underwhelmed by part 1.
I think that the only glue is that we stop cutting from just the individual stories, but we include that printing press. And so if throughout the first parts of the movie you weren't like, oh, kind of like all roads are leading to Horizon, like all of these different characters, at some point, like we're going to see, Luke Wilson and Kevin Costner team up against the Psych family in Horizon. Like, like when they start putting in the printing press, it's reminding you like this is the thing that's kind of bringing everything together, and like this is where all the characters are heading. And so in that way, like, yes, it didn't really connect, but it does just in like where they're headed.
It potentially connects.
Right. The Luke Wilson stuff, I thought it was interesting. I don't think he was trying to play it funny. I'm still laughing a little bit at him just because it's Luke Wilson and he has a funny way of talking. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, I don't know, like just some of the stuff was funny to me.
I agree. When he's scolding those guys over the campfire, a few of just his Luke Wilsonisms come out, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's, bottle rocket.
I was confused, or not confused. I was curious about that because they say to him, they're like, well, would you like to hear our side of the story? And so I was like, what's your side of the story? Like, what were you doing with the cows? Was something else happening? Is there something going on that we don't know about that will be revealed later? Or are these guys actually bad guys? And I wish he had said, like, yes, let me hear your side of the story. But I guess it's a story for another time.
Right. He was just not interested. He's like, look, I gave you your slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah.
In general, I wasn't a big fan of the British couple. Just their whole storyline seemed, that's the kind of conflict in a movie that just feels like very forced. And I almost like don't buy it. Like they know so little, but they signed up to go. Was that I don't know. It feels forced.
Right. Like, this movie is showing how brutal the frontier is, right? In the opening, we see the two land surveyors. One of them has a kid, and then we know that they die, and we know that they die because we see the bodies, but we see a lot of flies, right? And then the dude travels further, and we see a whole bunch of flies, but the camera doesn't pan down, and so we know that that's the kid's body. And I thought to myself, I was like, that's actually an interesting way of communicating to the audience that the kid is also dead, but they don't show it. And just as I'm thinking that, the camera cuts and boom, it shows this like dead kid. And I was like, wow, okay, that's, okay, fine. But from the beginning, the movie is showing like the frontier was brutal. It's brutal all the way through, every part of it. Look at all of these different groups of people. All of them are leading really intense lives. And then you have like these tourists, like, who are rich. They don't have any skills. It's just like, oh, this is a big laugh. Like, oh, look at that scout up there. Oh, this is so amazing. And it just is like, why are they going? Like, why are they going to where you could like literally be murdered at any moment? And and again, it's part of a bigger story. They were in the flash forwards a lot, so I guess they'll have a bigger part to play. But I also was just really, really annoyed by them. I would have smacked them in the face.
And like so many things in this movie, I feel like every interaction they had went on like 50 to 200% longer than it should have. Like when they take that water and it's just this drawn out scene. We spent like 8 minutes going back and forth getting this water back when it could have been like, 20 seconds. We would have got the picture. I don't know. There was a lot of that to me where, like I said, I don't mind long movies, but filmmaking is about efficiency and pithiness of delivering message and emotional reality, like moment to moment, quickly for an audience. And this just didn't always feel like it was in that groove, quite.
Right.
It like the wagon would just get stuck. It was the heat. The spokes were coming out.
That was interesting. I was curious, kind of like I said with the beginning with the land surveyor. There were some aspects of frontier life where I was like, oh, I actually want to like learn about this. I'm curious about how this would work, but then we don't really do that. It's just kind of like on the side.
I probably sound like I am really like hating on this movie, but I did enjoy it. And to what you're saying, one of the things I enjoyed most was seeing different elements of their culture, of their the technical aspects of their lives, in terms of what they were wearing, their equipment, things like the spokes coming out, things like the band playing at the river. I found those really immersive and really interesting. The stoves and the tents, that was interesting to see.
Yeah, just everybody's like, all right, put your stove out. I thought it was cool to open. It's like 1869 or 1859 or whatever year it is, and you already have like a stone church that's like in ruins. Because I think sometimes it's hard to remember that, like, we think of people coming here in like the 1700s and America becoming a country in like 1776, but there were people here for long periods of time before that, and like the America that's pushing westward already had like hundreds of years of history of people who were not indigenous to this continent like being there. So I thought that was a cool little detail. Yeah, it's like I said, for me, it's just odd choices. You have, my God, those Wyoming shots. I was just like, I need to travel to Wyoming. Like, I need to walk through that little valley where that crappy little mining town was, and like look up at the mountains. But it's so quick. Like all of the scenery stuff where, if I were there, I'd be like, shoot this, like forget about, like, I would be like Terrence Malick, like they would be like, hey, we gotta get through like 4 pages today. I'd be like, yeah, let's just forget that. Just have someone walk up that hill for 5 minutes. Let's focus on that. But Costner, he's been doing Yellowstone and all this stuff for years, so maybe to him it's just old hat. He's like, yeah, whatever, who cares about that mountain? We gotta have a real close dialogue discussion here. So I think I feel similarly to you. I just, for all of its odd choices, I really did end it thinking I want to see what's next, and I would probably, if I could take a bathroom break, I would probably watch part 2 right now.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Yeah. And I can't stress enough, as someone who likes Westerns, I think this is one of the first Westerns, like a tried and true cowboy story, that I've ever seen in a movie theater. And that was
interesting.
a really cool experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't, there was Killers of the Flower Moon last year, but before that, Hidalgo, maybe? Yeah. I don't even know if you can count that.
There were some scenes that were really reminding me of like older Westerns that I've seen, when Marigold is walking up the hill and Jenna Maloney is like walking down at her, and they're kind of avoiding each other and talking to each other the whole time. That reminded me of like an older movie and then, I mean, The Same Hill, when Kevin Costner and the guy from Stranger Things and Sweeney Todd are walking up the hill and they're having their dialogue. I was like, okay, this is good. And it feels like he's really trying to make, what he would consider like an ode to classic Westerns. And, I applaud that. I think that that's great.
Did you have a favorite storyline between the main 3 we go through?
I was fascinated by Piancene and the dad, and being like, all right, you're banished, but also I'm glad that you know who you are. And then that little kid who was sitting there, like, just not saying anything, but then they're speaking English. I was like fascinated by that. And I was really hoping that was going to be one of the main stories that we follow. Yes. Like, now we're going to follow like Piancene and the people who leave with him. And there's that woman who has the baby and she's like, I'm not going to go. And then she decides to go. So I was like, oh, this will be something. And that's kind of the last that you see, like really with them. And that was disappointing. So that was probably my favorite part. And then of the 3 main storylines, I don't know, man. I genuinely, like, I really feel like once we're through the first raid on Horizon, like I was still interested in, Francis and Elizabeth or Lizzie or whatever they call her, but then we're at the fort and it's just not as much going on. Like, I can't even tell you what happened. Like, they go to the fort. There's a little bit of love maybe between multiple characters, and then some soldiers go off to the Civil War, and like that took an hour, like
that flower scene. I got a sidebar on that for a second, because that's another example of one of those mystifying choices. So, Lizzie, right? She cuts the embroidered flowers, gives them to the soldiers. They're going off to war. Michael Rooker gives this big sentimental speech about how it means so much to them and they might cling to them while they die and things like that. But we don't spend any time really getting to know these soldiers outside of that very strange scene where he steals his wife's bed. So I wondered why we stole the wife's bed instead of maybe seeing like a little romance between the girl and the soldier. Just it was a nice scene, but I was just like, where was the setup for the scene?
Yeah.
It feels like it easily could have been there.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like from the previews from this one into the second one, I don't think we're going to get too much into the Civil War, but I know that if you read like the description of these movies, it's like it's a 15-year period about the Civil War, post-Civil War, all this stuff. And so if these two movies do well and they make number 3, maybe number 3 will be the Civil War movie. It'll be that part of it. And these guys who, we only saw as like goofy side characters, maybe we'll spend tons and tons of time with them, and it will all come around. And, the final shot of the film will be, one of those flowers pinned to something or something, but it's a lot. And, I want to be very respectful and also open-minded, but like it is so much to ask of an audience who can't watch this at home. Like, if this was a TV show, you could watch the episodes again, but it's a lot to ask of people to remember all of this stuff and then go see another 3-hour-long movie, and then God knows how long between parts 3 and 4, if they ever come. I hope that part 2 ends in at least a somewhat conclusive way, because if they don't make 3 and 4, then I'll just feel and this is why I don't get into TV shows. If you listen to the show regularly, you've heard me say this. This is why I don't get into TV shows, because you get invested, you spend hours of your life, and then it gets canceled, and so you never know what happens. A movie, hour and a half, if it sucks, it's over, you move on. But this is like, I'm about to be 6 hours deep into Horizon.
And this is this kind of problem we have with movies right now, right? It's this sort of MCU-ification of everything.
Yeah.
There's like a constant story that keeps evolving. I kind of had this bait and switch with Rebel Moon recently. I thought there was only going to be 2 parts of Rebel Moon, and the last 15 minutes of Rebel Moon Part 2 is just the setup for Rebel Moon Part 3.
Is there?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I only saw part 1.
Right, and I like those. For those who know me, I'm positive on those. But yeah, I'm worried. Horizon Part 2, really excited for it, but I don't see these movies making their budget back. I'm not convinced we'll get parts 3 and 4. I really hope they actually try and end all these, like this myriad of storylines. I keep saying 3 main storylines. I'm not even sure if it is 3. It's so many that I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I am all for, like, if even if it's only 2 parts, even if it was only this one.
Yeah.
If Kevin Costner is willing to put up his own money and make this, 12-hour movie, that's great. And quite frankly, more people should be doing that. But I also agree with you where it's like, it's MCU definitely, but also Avatar. You know, James Cameron makes Avatar, and it's like the biggest thing in the world. So he's like, all right, I'm going to make a sequel. And then like a year goes by. He's like, actually, I'm making 5 to 7 sequels, and they'll come out in 20 years. Bye. I'll see you in 20 years. And so it can't just be this one thing or this two. It has to be this massive, massive thing. So I sound like I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth right now. Like on one hand, I'm like, yes, Kevin Costner, do this. On the other hand, I'm like, don't screw me over, Kevin Costner.
No, I totally agree. And I'm very critical of this movie, but I also would recommend everyone go out and see it. Like, you want to see a Western on the big screen? Here's your chance. And Kevin Costner put a ton of money. He built these huge sets. Mm-hmm. He made this like 25-minute raid scene.
Yeah. I mean, I think for its confounding nature, it's worth it for people who, you know, claim to be movie people. It's worth it just for like, go in and watch scenes where you say, oh, this is this is someone who knows films. This is a director, right? Yes. And then you turn around and you're like, what is going on? It's worth it for that. And then secondary to that is genuinely, I thought that this movie flew by for the most part. A few scenes, I was like, come on. But I think I've seen a lot longer 3-hour movies.
Yeah, I think this was one of the longest 3-hour movies I've ever seen. And definitely the longest 3-hour movie of 2024 so far.
Sure. I went into this too with no drink, no popcorn. I ate a couple of frozen waffles before I left the house, just so I'd have something in me, but I didn't want to be sleepy, you know?
Respect.
Yeah.
The only time I've ever seen a 3-hour long movie without a beverage was Beau Was Afraid, which actually turned into kind of a funny meta joke, but it was torture, so I feel very bad for you. It's that 4DX, you know, when you're watching those dry desert environments.
I think that I did Beau Was Afraid also with no food and no drink. I did Killers of the Flower Moon with a drink, and I was squirming in my seat. I had to use the bathroom so bad. Like the second the credits hit, I ran to the bathroom. I made it. I never leave films ever. Yeah. I would rather like if I have to walk out, I'm just walking out for good. I'm not what, you know, you could miss a key thing, you know? So
I have a thing where I have to stay for the end of the credits, and I bought like the large water for Horizon because I knew I was going to need the hydration. So I was hurting by the end of those credits.
Yes,
I was there. I stayed, Mr. Costner.
I did leave when the credits started, and I was fairly certain, you know, we were done with the flash forward to the next film. I did head out because I knew that I had to come back and do this, and like it's almost 1:00 my time, so that's almost 11:00 your time.
Yes.
Yeah. Correct. So not so bad, but I was like, I got to get back and do this thing so that we're not up all night. I don't know. Do you have anything else that we didn't mention? I mean, I'm sure you have 100 things.
Yeah, you know, we could go on and on, but the one thing I would really like to convey to any listeners, because I know people are going to ask us about a Western, is how are the gunfights? How is the violence? And I'd say it's pretty good. I thought the guns are very loud, so I was a fan of the sound mixing. And I thought it was unique and cool that it seemed to show that everybody who died took multiple gunshots to kill.
Yes.
Which made it more brutal and probably more realistic. And so just as a final little detail to note, I thought that was well handled and in the pro section for the pros and cons list.
Yep. No one is getting shot with a big puff of smoke and then dropping dead right in their tracks, which is great. Interesting you brought up the sound mixing because I was really into the music and the sound effects, But there were some scenes with dialogue that I was like, who is mixing this? Particularly with the bigger of the brothers, whose name I've already forgotten.
They
Sykes.
got the really bassy voice, who wears the
Yeah.
wolfskin.
Just every time he was talking, I was like, something's off here. Something sounds really, really strange about like how this conversation is mixed. I want to shout out Michael Angarano. He played Walter. He's the husband who's like trying to sell off the property. I love this actor. Love him, love him, love him. He's in one of my favorite films ever, Gentlemen Broncos. He's the star of that. And he's kind of becoming a like, hey, that guy kind of an actor.
Yeah.
You know, he had a small part in Oppenheimer. But anytime he shows up, I'm very, very excited. And I thought that he was quite funny in this, even for the small part that he had.
Yeah.
And I was kind of bummed out to see him go.
Yeah, strong scene he had. That was very intense.
That scene in that cabin was great. And then maybe my favorite scene is when they're at the trading post and they're trying to convince Russell to like shoot this guy and his son.
Mm.
And just how all of that played out. I was like, oh, this is like now like Sergio Leone Western, like very tense, you know, like kind of a standoff and like, oh my gosh. So yeah. Overall, I think that I liked it. And like I said, I feel like I need to reserve my judgment until I see the next one.
Yeah, I would say I liked it. I wouldn't say I loved it. And I can't say I liked it a lot, but I liked it. I'd recommend you see it. I would call it a movie, but it's got some schmovie sections.
Yes.
If we're being honest.
This might be the ultra rare full schmovie movie film. Like it's just all three like wrapped into one, fighting for dominance. You know,
if it had a little less schmovie, it'd be a little better movie.
Yes, definitely, for sure. Well, hey, Paul, thank you for joining me. Where can people find you online?
I'm not a real film person. I'm just a guy on the internet. So you can find me on Twitter at TrigRaptor. That's TRYGRAPTOR. I can't spell words out loud. I don't know if you know this about me, but like,
yeah.
And if you try and spell a word to me that's longer than 3 letters, like, good luck.
I agree.
have no idea.
Yep.
But yeah, you can find me at the same handle on Letterboxd. I'm Paul Muad'Dib on both those. Yeah.
I remember when we would read some of your comments on the show. And we'd be like, is it like a math dinosaur? Like, is he really into math? Like trigonometry? And then we couldn't remember how trigonometry is spelled. If it's TRY. Yeah. So we were like, oh, I'm not really sure, but okay.
Hey, Math Raptor, that is pretty cool. I'll take that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, if you'll take that, we'd love it if you give us a rating and review wherever you're listening. Really helps out the show. We are currently in a cat and mouse game with the Jamie Kennedy podcast. We're both the cat and the mouse because he's unaware of this, but we're trying to beat him in Apple Podcast reviews. So if you have it within your heart to take 5 seconds, we'd love it if you'd give us a review over on Apple Podcasts, if that's where you're listening. If not, disregard this. Also, if you're Jamie Kennedy, I'm sorry. Also, we'd love it if you send us an email, moviefriendspodcast@gmail.com. Please, God, if you have watched this movie, send us an email and tell us what you think. Like, I do feel like I need to talk to people about this. That's why I was glad that I was doing this right after. I can't imagine walking out of a theater and just being alone with my thoughts on this movie. So if you have seen this, please let us know what you think about it. You can also support the show, patreon.com/moviefriendspodcast. $5 a month gets you access to all of our additional episodes, our patron-only Discord, and you get to vote for monthly episodes, monthly themes. It's a great time. And you know what? It's like the cost of one Cosmic Brownie or one sticky bun at this point, really. So, you know, it's summertime. You've been thinking about watching what you eat. Hey, take that sticky bun money, put it into the show. Anyway, this is normally why I have Michelle here, so that she can keep me on track. But yes.
Hey, I can help out because I am a patron. So, you know, this is the user review right here. It's a great time. You should absolutely join. 100% recommended. Guaranteed better than a stagecoach ride all the way out to Horizon, getting attacked by scorpions and searing heat. So,
oh my God. Oh man. I'm so glad you said that. What was that? What was that?
I just want to say that, like, I've had that happen where you wake up in a tent, there's a scorpion. Like, it's not a big deal. It's effectively you're crushing a bug in your house.
Man, it transformed into like a horror movie for like 5 seconds, complete with like CGI goo. Anyway,
yeah.
Interesting movie. Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate you staying up late to talk about this.
My pleasure, Seth. Thank you.
And thank you very much for listening. Until next time, have a good one.
Movie Friends is produced by Seth Vargas and Michelle Rubenstein. Music by Anthony Vicora. If you like the show, please subscribe and give us a rating. It really helps us find new friends. Thanks!